So today is going to be a relatively more sentimental video where I really want to just, as we're approaching the very end of this year, or maybe by the time you're watching this already starting the brand new year, reflect a little bit about the 7 life lessons that I really learned this past year that we can hopefully implement and take with us going forward into the brand new year. So regardless, I think, of whether or not you're watching this in 2022 or 2023, or maybe you're even watching this in 2024, I think today's video is hopefully going to be universally relevant because a lot of it is going to apply and also come straight from just personal experience. So this is not something that's going to come directly from an article or anything like that. They're just going to come from personal experiences, and hopefully there's going to be some that are very unique. So, you know, we're not going to repeat things that are frequently told. There's just hopefully going to be something that's original about this video. So with that being said, we're going to get right to it about the 7 life lessons that we learned in today's video. But as always, if you guys hopefully would like to share some support, remember to smash the like button, consider subscribing and hitting the bell, and as always, feel free to comment any questions, personal thoughts about maybe whether or not you do or do not agree with any of these ideas. So with that being said, let's get this video started. So maybe to start with this is that the first life lesson that I really learned this year is really about how important it is to be able to find your people. And while I think that the conventional advice that you'll probably get is something along the lines of like, oh, you know, you're the average of the 5 people that you're around, so therefore you should find the right people, right? I think the less conventional advice that not a lot of people talk about is about what that actually physically means. What does it mean to be around the right people, right? And I think that one of the biggest things that I've really learned is that at the end of the day, that because every single person has very different values, there is no defined characteristic of what that means by the right people. I think that the biggest thing is not only is it important to spend time around the right people that support your goals, but it's also important to make sure that they all share in the same values as well, because that's what's ultimately going to help you to do a lot of different things of whatever you're trying to do going forward in life. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've really learned. And going on to that is I think the second life lesson that I really learned is really about how important it is to have teamwork. Because I think one of the biggest things I think is that a lot of times it is very common that a lot of people will try to walk a certain path by themselves. And I think that while it's important to walk the path initially, you might have to do things solo, you might have to become self-reliant, you might have to do things by yourself. At the very end of the day, every single big thing that has ever been achieved was always made up of a group of people. And I think at the end of the day, you're not going to have the strength to be able to do every single thing on your own. Very similar to how we have strengths, we have weaknesses. If you're trying to play basketball, right, you need a center who's going to be the really tall person, but you also need someone who's maybe smaller and faster. If you're running a company, you're going to need someone creative. You're also going to need someone very technical. You're going to need someone that's good on the tech side, someone that's good at generating ideas, someone that's good at public speaking, someone that's good at sales, someone that's good at other things. So the big idea is that why it's so important that it comes down to the people is that while it is true that you cannot do everything by yourself, it's also important to note that maybe you don't have to do things. There were times this year when I realized that, you know, there were some times that I was doing a certain side hustle or a business project or a certain something, and I realized that I didn't know how to do it. You know, I didn't know how to do a certain something. I wasn't sure how to approach something. But when you learn the idea of teamwork, what's really cool is that you also start to learn that maybe something more advanced is it's possible that maybe you don't know how to do a certain something, but maybe you don't have to learn how to do it. It's possible you can maybe hire and put together a team and have someone to be able to help you do that particular something while you can focus on what you actually are good at. And I think that's one of the first lessons, the second lesson that I really learned this year. Now, the third life lesson that I really learned this year is something that's actually a little bit also less conventional, I think, especially in the finance community, which is really about some of the benefits to corporate. I think a lot of times in the finance community, people tend to kind of bash corporate a lot of times, and there's reasons for it too. Even I have, had moments where I've kind of talked about how my experience of one of the reasons why I personally also left corporate. But at the end of the day, I think that being in the entrepreneurial world isn't always as glamorous as many people make it out to be. There are a lot of difficult moments that come when you're in the entrepreneurial world, when you're a business owner. You often have to take charge, you often have to do things solo. Even if you have a team together, you still have to often lead the way. There's a lot of times you run into moments of uncertainty. You don't know when your next paycheck is going to come, and sometimes things happen. Sometimes problems happen. Sometimes things just come out of nowhere and you don't know how to deal with a certain situation. You're probably going to learn a lot from it, but you're also still going to have to deal with it. And I think at the end of the day, the big idea is that while it is true that one of the things about corporate life is that while it is true that it can be very, very difficult at times, it can be difficult, because you're always being told what to do. I also do sometimes feel deep down inside back then, life was also a lot more simple, I think. You didn't really have to think as much. You kind of just showed up to work. It wasn't necessarily fun or enjoyable. It might even have been repetitive, but at least you had a little bit of peace of mind that you could kind of just sit there, collect your paycheck as long as you did what you wanted, and go home, rest, and then live forever. Whereas in the entrepreneurial world, you often feel like you're always constantly thinking, constantly going for something, which is good in its own way, but it's also sometimes very tiring. And I think that's the part that a lot less people really talk about. The fourth life lesson that I really learned is a little bit more interestingly niche, but as some of you guys may or may not know, is that earlier this year, I actually briefly took into a couple of acting workshops. And one of the biggest reasons was I was trying to work on learning how to become better at things like public speaking. And so in that process as well, they also covered a lot of topics related to memorization, how to actually physically memorize things. And one of the things that I think I've learned at that time period was because there were many moments where sometimes, and I probably still do it, you can probably still sometimes see in videos where sometimes I might stumble on certain words or things like that. I am bilingual at the end of the day, but the big idea is that one of the things that I really learned from those workshops is that when you truly learn the material and when you truly grasp it and everything sticks to you, things are going to come a lot more naturally, and it's going to be a lot easier to memorize the things that you want to talk about. But at the end of the day, also, it's very, very important to develop a level of improv, because a lot of things in life you just cannot physically prepare for. So even in general conversations, when you're interacting with people, you don't know what the other side's going to say. You might be able to predict what they're going to say, but you don't know the questions you're going to be asked. You don't know what they're going to say. You don't know what can pop up in life. And in life, a lot of things can kind of just happen. Sadly, truly, actually in a way, good things too sometimes too. So it really goes both ways, but it's really about how to embrace improv, how to memorize, and how to kind of just navigate in life in general. I know it's not necessarily one thing, but it's just more of a collection of things that I really learned from a particular experience that I had, or set of experiences that I had earlier this year. The fifth life lesson is also interestingly something I learned from an acting workshop that I took earlier this year, which is really about how to understand people. And it's really about the idea that I think a lot of times people approach the world and look at things in a very black-white way, right? He's good, he's bad, he's evil, he sucks, he's awesome, he's a hero, and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, when you look at it from a very, very big picture, every single person kind of has their own intention, their own background, their own story to what got them to do a particular something. So why this is related is that because if you've ever been hurt by someone, which as sad as it is, to be hurt by other people, one of the things you have to understand is that a lot of times, many people that cause pain or hurt to a lot of other people, deep down inside, might actually be hurting themselves. Because I think a lot of times when people cause pain or things that are not so good, it's often because they themselves might have also experienced something that was very, very painful, something very, very difficult, something very, very drastic in many cases, that they're now just trying to pass on in a wheel and cycle of just difficulties. So one of the biggest things that I've really learned is that a lot of times you have to sometimes, when it comes to your enemies, sometimes you have to sometimes actually have feels for them. So sometimes they might even be the ones that are actually hurt more themselves. And I think when you kind of understand their perspective from where they come from, why they did what they did, you sometimes actually start to develop a lot of feels and maybe even sympathize a little bit with what's going on. And I think that being able to understand character, understand intention, and understand people, that's one of the biggest life lessons that I really learned from this particular year. The sixth life lesson that I think I really learned this year is really about how important it is to kind of overcome your fear and be able to just take charge and make moves. This is actually something that I learned from a lot of difficulties with relationships that I've had this year, romantic. Now, obviously, I'm not a dating coach. This is a finance channel. This is not a dating channel. But you can actually really apply this with a lot of different areas. And it's really that because there were many, many moments, I think, where I really wanted to do a particular something, but I wasn't sure how it was going to go. So instead, I ended up actually just pausing and not making any moves. And I think one of the biggest life lessons I learned is that sometimes it's better to make moves and pursue a certain something and to accept the potential consequence that might come, but believe that you can bounce back from the consequence anyway, even if it was to happen, than to sit still and not make any moves at all. So where does this actually come in is, for example, with like relationships, but you can actually really apply this to even things like business, life in general, projects, potential experiences, decisions, life choices, anything in that particular world. There were times when I realized looking back that, for example, maybe I was very afraid to approach someone or speak to someone, that deep down inside, it might have been a better decision that while it is true that rejection sucks, rejection is painful, it can, do a lot of things sometimes, it's sometimes better to just make moves to pursue and maybe try to pursue a certain someone, a certain project, a certain person, or certain something, and try to bounce back for the potential consequence it is that could potentially come than to just sit still and not make any moves at all. Because at the end of the day, you're either going to actually achieve, maybe you actually will achieve and do that particular something, or at the very least, if anything, you can hopefully at least learn something from it, or certainly at least tell yourself you tried. You took chances, maybe it didn't go sadly the way it was, but at least you took an attempt and now you know what it is. And I think that being able to have that boldness to just do it, or, if anything, bounce back from it, if anything were to pop up, is sometimes better than just to sit still and not do anything at all. And then the last thing I would really say is maybe the final life lesson to share that I really learned is about how even though this happens to be a finance channel, I feel like at the end of the day, one of the things that I think maybe makes my channel a little bit weird compared to a lot of other channels is that I preach always the time is that as important as money really, really is, there's just a lot of things that are more important than that. It's not to say that it's not important. Obviously, you do need money to pay for things. You need to pay for bills. You need to pay for expenses. You need to buy your way through many, many different things. At the end of the day, there are still many, many areas of life that money simply cannot always necessarily buy. Examples of this are like friendship, right? Lovers, personality. There are things that you cannot always fully buy, right? Genuineness, philosophy, the way you look at life. These are things that really have to come from life experience. You cannot really buy these things. At least you certainly cannot buy them genuine. You might be able to buy experiences, like you can buy a travel experience, you can buy a meditation experience, you can buy a workshop. But at the end of the day, there are still limitations to it, and there's a lot of things. Health. That's another big one, right? Yes, you can buy, there's a lot of things you can buy in the world of health, but at the end of the day, being able to be knowledgeable about health, being able to have the people around you to help you, being able to have being able to take care of yourself. These are things that are not always necessarily defined or certainly spoken of when it comes to things that you can immediately buy within limitations. And I think that's probably the final thing to really pass on and really share with everyone here. But of course, there are so many things that we can potentially share, but I figured I'd just limit them to these 7 things. So that being said, that's pretty much what I really wanted to share in today's video. If you guys found that relatively insightful, maybe consider smashing the like button or leave a comment, suggestions. Feel free to subscribe, hit the bell if you guys are interested, or honestly just really about anything at all. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe, stay well, happy holidays, happy new year, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much again.